How's it going, everybody? Uh-oh, he didn't start it with welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. I know, I hear all about it when I don't start the video the same way. So, here's the thing. I get a lot of information as a YouTube content creator that is made available to me about my audience, what they're watching, what they're interested in, what trends are happening. And YouTube, like it or not, is largely driven by trends, by what people are clicking on. And the reality is right now that the audience that watches this channel is pretty much watching videos about Iran and nothing else. And I know sometimes I pronounce it Iran, sometimes I pronounce it Iran. Deal with it. So the fact is that most of my history content is not really being watched as much as it usually is, even the back content, the back catalog. You guys want to watch stuff about Iran. This is what we're talking about. This is what is making history right now in our world. So let's go with it. Let's keep talking about it. We'll sprinkle in the history where we're able to, and I apologize if the videos haven't been as frequent as they usually are lately. Pretty much every minute, like to the detriment of my dishes getting done and things like that. Pretty much every spare minute that I've had has been going into getting this book done and edited and ready for the release date on April 6th. So if you haven't already heard about the book, Trumbull County Boys, did a video about that. Put the link down in the description. It'll be up at the end as well. But we're here to talk about Iran. And I was looking at Warfronts because I often look at their stuff to see what they're talking about, not to watch it, but to see the titles of the videos. And they've got one, it says, "A ground invasion of Iran is coming." And this was 2 days ago. It's got nearly 1 million views, and I think this would be a good place for us to start. We don't know where this is going to go, but man, it should be scary for all of us because of how it could go. And I think a ground invasion is one of those like worst case scenario type deals. So let's talk about it.
For the past 7 days, the nation of Iran has endured a near constant bombardment, and now it's facing the threat of a full-scale invasion. The invaders won't be American, nor will they be Israeli, or at least not the vast majority of the forces who will place boots on the ground. Instead, Israeli Mossad, the American CIA, and the air forces of both nations are getting ready to support a massive ground offensive by Kurdish paramilitaries.
Now, I will say one thing, and I've been engaging in a lot of folks in comments and kind of, you know, talking and discussing things on social media, and I've heard a lot of people saying things like about how this thing with using the Kurds to kind of help start a revolt in Iran is kind of out of the blue, and we're flying by the seat of our pants. No chance that's true. If there's anything, and I don't know much about the CIA, if there's anything I know about the CIA is that they've got people upon people upon people just thinking up ideas and making every contingency plan you can imagine. There's no way on God's green earth they didn't have plans in place and that they weren't already working those plans for months, if not years, laying the groundwork for something like this in the event that the opportunity arose to put it into place. This is similar to how we operated initially in Afghanistan. For those of you who are of the generation that aren't old enough to remember that, in Afghanistan in the months after September 11th, the way things got started there was that we were using a lot of U.S. air power, but we had CIA assets in the country working with this organization called the Northern Alliance, which was a rebel organization in Afghanistan that wanted to overthrow the Taliban who were in charge of the country. And so that was how we initially got started. And those guys were already there and had already been forming those relationships and preparing for that. I have no doubt that's the case here, but this is, of course, a little more complicated because, number one, the Kurds have a complicated history with, and I'm sure they'll talk about this, with the previous, the royal family of Iran who used to be in power with the Shah and everything. They're also based out of northern Iraq rather than being in Iran already. But the Kurds are, I think, originally from Iran. Iraq's kind of an exiled area that they've gone to.
Crossing the border from Iraq, the Kurds are expected to arrive in the thousands as soon as mere days or even hours from
They
the
may
time
even
that
be
this
there
episode is
already.
released. For the Kurds, the offensive is a chance to carve out a section of their ancestral homeland, and for the US and Israel, it's a plan that could push Iran over the edge into total regime collapse. For the past several months, Kurdish forces have been preparing in secret, and now Iran seems to have caught on.
Yeah, so I think this was always going to be the plan, or at least the best case scenario for the U.S., and it's been complicated. I know there's been mixed messages at times sent out by the Trump administration about this, but it seems to me, if we're cutting through all the noise, that the hope and the plan has been that they would use an opportunity where it seemed like there was already some dissent rising up again, as it does from time to time in Iran, that there would be an opportunity to kind of cut the head off the snake, which is what they did when they struck when they did. And then the hope would be that using the Kurds and then using the Iranian people to rise up, that they themselves would then overthrow their government. And of course, the argument is that the Trump administration is saying we're not making regime change a necessary component of this. Well, that may be true. They may be able to declare that they've accomplished their goals without that happening, but there's no doubt they'd absolutely would love for that to happen, whether it's one of the stated goals or not.
Forces in the air are already creating a path, and other regional forces with decades-long designs on Iranian territory are sensing their moment to strike. Iran is just inches from fighting a ground war, potentially even on multiple fronts. So here's what's going to happen, and here's why it matters. Brewing in the background. For Iran war observers and geopolitical analysts across the globe, Wednesday the 4th of March was a very strange day. Over the prior 48 hours, open-source trackers and regional experts had started to raise the spectre of a potential Kurdish offensive into Iran, picking up on telltale signs that something somewhere was brewing. That evening, however, Israeli outlet I-24 News broke a story that seemed like it would change everything. Thousands of Kurdish fighters were already on the attack, pouring across the border region in armored columns streaming southward.
And this is one of the complications of this, and there is a real fog of war element to this, because we've got a number of kind of sources that we're getting our news from. You've got the Iranian state media that is reporting stuff and obviously is heavily biased and often saying stuff that just is flat out not true. Other times they've said stuff that we thought maybe wasn't true and it maybe has turned out to be true. Great example of that was like in that first day, the report about the girls' school being hit. Now, my understanding is that this girls' school was housed in a building that used to be part of a army base that's pretty much right next door. Obviously, you're kind of endangering them just by the very nature of doing that. But that's neither here nor there. It was reported that the U.S. and Israeli strikes had hit. There was a lot of questions because for several days, the only people reporting this were Iranian state media. Then there were reports showing videos saying it was actually an Iranian missile that had misfired and came back down, and a lot of people ran with that. And now it seems to be that the evidence is leaning toward it being an American strike that hit this girls' school. And it's an absolute tragedy. It's absolutely not the thing you ever want to have happen in a war of any kind. The unfortunate reality is this happens in every war. It's the civilians who end up paying the price the most, who end up in harm's way. And that is not attaching blame to anybody. That's just the reality. And, the Iranians are probably not in a great position to be complaining about that because they've killed thousands of their own citizens. That doesn't make it right for the Americans to do it. One civilian death is one too many, period. And certainly young girls, it's awful. It's absolutely awful that this has happened. So that's what I mean. And then you have the Israeli sources that are reporting things, and they're often heavily biased as well. And, of course, American media has its own biases and has its own spin on things. And so the bottom line that I would say in all of this is when you hear something reported, first of all, who's the source? What's their bias? What is their goal? Is it just some random person repeating it? Because there's a lot of that. I mean, if you watch social media today, 99% of what you're seeing is people posting stuff that is 1,000% just not true. They'll post a picture of somebody and put a quote with it. And people will just believe it because there's the picture of the person and there's the quote. They must have said it because it's posted on the internet. It's ridiculous. I saw just today the exact same quote attributed to Urban Meyer and to Nick Saban, both former college football coaches, about players within their organizations, one for Ohio State, one for Alabama. The exact same quote with the exact same numbers and the exact same money figures. Complete BS in both cases, but people posted it and people run with it. So just think and question. And when in any doubt whatsoever, just don't repost it.
Unconfirmed video began to circulate, well-connected journalists started piling on, and then, almost out of nowhere, the fever broke. Highly reputable experts, speaking with Kurdish leaders and sources on the ground, denied that the offensive had begun, and where social media would typically be bombarded with new reports and videos of carnage on the ground, none came.
Yeah.
By the next morning, most of the claims that the offensive was happening had already been retracted, even as major news outlets started discussing in depth the fact that a Kurdish advance still seems to be on the way.
And this is going to happen over and over and over again with all of this.
Here at Warfronts, we can't offer precise clarification about just how or why the international geopolitics community got its wires crossed, but we can confirm a few things. Number one, any large-scale Kurdish offensive has not yet started as the time this episode was written, although it's possible that a few early Kurdish advances into the border zone at the same time as these claims of a larger offensive went out may have contributed to the confusion. Number two, Kurdish forces are massing on the Iranian border, even if the attack hasn't started yet. And observation number three, whenever this offensive does begin, it is going to be big. Now look, in order to understand what's happening here, we'll start with some of the very basics.
And we should mention too, and maybe he'll get to this, but the Kurds also remember a time before when they tried to do their best to fight against people that were the enemies of Western countries, and we kind of failed them. So there may be some doubts in their minds about whether our air power and things like that is going to back them up this time.
The Kurdish people are a diaspora population with roughly 25 to 30 million people living in the Middle
lot of
East
people.
and 5 to 10 million across the globe. They have no state of their own, but they lay claim to a sprawling region known as Kurdistan, portions of which are located in modern-day Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. In Iran, Kurds live mostly in the northwest, along the border with northern Iraq, where Iraqi Kurdistan functions as a semi-autonomous region.
And this all goes back to 100 years ago when Western powers with no business doing it, particularly like the British and the French, just started drawing lines on a map and created these countries out of thin air, and didn't really fully take into account the multiple layers of complication with all of this.
That's where Kurdish forces are thought to be building up their strength in advance of an imminent attack. Kurdish forces have a long and storied history of collaboration with the global West, including the United States, although that hasn't always gone well for the Kurds,
Right.
especially due to the influence of their primary arch-rival, Turkey. Kurdish forces organize themselves into a range of paramilitary groups.
And this is part of the complication, right? Because Turkey is in NATO. They're, at least on paper, they're an ally of these Western countries like the United States. They don't always act like one, and that certainly complicates this.
Which operate often, but not always, in support of common goals and regional objectives. In Iran, however, the Kurdish minority has lived under the thumb of the Islamic Republic for most of the last half-century, with the groups that would seek Kurdish autonomy in Kurdish Iran across a land the Kurds call Rojhelat, mostly clustering safely in neighboring nations. So the Middle East's Kurdish population has lots and lots of fighters, and it's got designs on Iranian Kurdistan, even if it hasn't been able to liberate the region over the last several decades. They've also got a set of partners that could really use their support, namely the United States and Israel. At the 7-day mark of the ongoing war with Iran, American and Israeli tactical successes have been stunning. Non-stealthy heavy bombers can now operate freely across parts of Iranian airspace.
And listen, don't buy into the stuff. Like, if you're seeing stuff where, the U.S. is out of weapons and they don't have anything to be able to fire, and they're bombing silhouettes on the ground, come on, no. Don't buy that crap.
Most of the Iranian regime's former leadership is already dead, and Iran has no way to directly contest the aerial or naval superiority of its adversaries. But at the same time, the US and Israel are each far short of their ultimate objectives,
Right.
to the extent that Washington can even define its objectives clearly. Iranians have yet to commit to a full-scale revolt in the street, and decentralized Iranian forces are still launching ballistic missiles and especially long-range drones against US bases, Israeli territory, and targets all across the Persian Gulf and the wider Middle East. Washington has made it clear that at the very least it seeks regime change in Iran, but as of now, there's not a clear path to get there other than continue.
I don't know how clear that's been, though. I mean, it's like I said at the beginning, it's been complicated, and the messaging hasn't always, I think, been very clear, especially when you've got folks like Hegseth and Trump doing the talking, who are known to just kind of go off the cuff. I think Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State's been much more measured and tried to be much more diplomatic in his tone.
Continuing to bomb Iran and defend the surrounding airspace for as long as bombs and air defense interceptors last. The alternative, of course, would be boots on the ground, but the US appears very committed to avoiding that outcome.
And here's the deal. We talked in the video I did a few days ago about the War Powers Act, and there was a vote held in both the Senate and the House, and in both cases, not enough votes to invoke the War Powers Act and to basically shut this down. Not even enough just to simply pass it, let alone to override a veto, which would have come. So it's going to go on. But you make a major change like sending in ground troops, you might start to see some of those, some of the Republicans and the few Democrats that sided with the administration go into the other side.
As long as possible, and America's Trump administration is keenly aware of the political costs of a large-scale deployment. Nor can Israel handle a ground offensive by itself. Its military is designed to hold Israeli territory, not to capture territory aboard. But that's where the Kurdistan population comes in. A large, experienced, willing cadre of paramilitary fighters with the incentives and ability to surge into Iran in a way that would help the US. According to Axios, preparations have been underway for months, with Israeli Mossad and the American CIA spearheading efforts to get them ready, and American and Israeli funds reportedly flowing into Kurdish coffers. According to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, it's Israel that's been doing the bulk of the work, providing weapons to Kurdish forces, although the New York Times reports that the CIA has sent at least small arms to Iranian Kurdish groups in the past. While the offensive didn't actually start on Wednesday in the way that international sources had initially claimed, there is ample evidence to suggest that an offensive is coming in the very near future. Last month, 5 key Kurdish Iranian political parties joined together to form a coalition.
That's big. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Not that these folks are enemies, but certainly we talk all the time about how often in history disparate groups who have different objectives and different goals and desires can come together for the thing that they all want, and then they'll worry about what comes next after that. Obviously, Iran knows this is going down. This is in the works, so they're going to probably prepare for it. The question is, what are they able to do?
Unifying the armed wings of all 5. The US purportedly held a series of recent calls with Kurdish factional leadership, including at least one call that involved Donald Trump personally, while in closed-door meetings, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu supposedly expressed deep knowledge of Kurdish fighting groups and pre-existing attack plans for the battles ahead. In public remarks on Wednesday, the White House denied coordinating with Kurdish forces around a future offensive, but US actions speak for themselves. Over the last few days, the US and Israel have started to bombard Iranian targets in the northwest with growing frequency, softening the areas where Kurdish forces would be expected to advance. Iran seems to understand what's coming too. If its missile and drone strikes on the officers of Kurdish political parties and its threats of massive retaliation after a Kurdish advance are any indication, that is. Even in conversations with global journalists on Wednesday, as Kurdish leaders denied that any offensive was underway at that time, many of those same leaders confirmed that an offensive was in the preparatory phases. Not all Kurdish groups are in alignment around the coming offensive, and some Kurdish authorities...
And we do ourselves a disservice when we assume that all Kurds are alike and all Kurds want the same thing. Some of them probably very much are content with how things are and want to be left alone and would like to live their lives. So we shouldn't just assume they all think the same way, just as we shouldn't assume that any group, like that all Americans think the same way or that all people in Israel think the same way.
Especially in Iranian Kurdistan, have signaled that they don't intend to support or facilitate any military operations. nor have global experts been entirely supportive of the idea, as many have pointed out a Kurdish offensive would raise the risk of civil war and breakdown across Iran while ignoring recent history, especially in Syria, where the US has worked with the Kurds to accomplish military goals and then promptly abandon them. But although those concerns are very real, and it is entirely possible that a Kurdish offensive could quickly devolve into a strategic misadventure, all sides are currently incentivized to give it a shot. The US and Israel would very much like to have a friendly ground forces active in Iran, especially without putting their people at risk. Iranian Kurdish groups understand that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to secure their homelands. The Kurdish diaspora across the Middle East currently has forces to spare and has the need to try and secure new territory after its enclave in Syria was dismantled and an amnesty deal in Turkey has made it far harder for armed Kurdish groups to remain there. That doesn't change the difficult reality that there's a real chance a Kurdish offensive could lead to catastrophe. But the circumstances are just right on all sides to suggest that the Kurds and their international partners can justify the risk. The course of the offensive. Now's the time of writing, it's impossible to know precisely when the Kurdish offensive into Iran will begin. We can, however, give a good idea of how that offensive is going to look once it does begin. Kurdish forces will be advancing from the west across the border from northern Iraq, and they may have already captured the border outposts and early defenses that would stand in their way. Over 100 Iranian positions have already been hit, suggesting that the Kurds will be able to form a local foothold on Iranian territory at a bare minimum. The offensive would likely include at least a few thousand Kurdish fighters using armored vehicles, mortars, and artillery pieces. Iranian Kurdish militias would probably be leading the charge, and their number would be about 2,500 fighters, but Iraqi Peshmerga forces claim to have up to 200,000 fighters at their disposal. Air support will come from US and Israeli forces, and Kurdish fighters may have unmanned drones at their disposal to provide a level of strike capability and aerial intelligence gathering in the surrounding area.
I mean, 200,000 is a massive force. Now, I understand that the Iranian military is pretty powerful. They're a large country, very populous country, but when you combine the potential for hundreds of thousands of ground troops, not that they would send that many necessarily, with the air power and the support being provided by Israel and the United States, it's a big deal.
While it's not impossible that Kurdish forces could achieve a breakthrough, similar to the Syrian rebel offensive of late 2024, and come crashing into Tehran outright, that outcome is highly unlikely. Instead, the offensive is probably a way to overstress the Iranian military and force Iran to make decisions that would place it at a tactical disadvantage.
That's a great point. We shouldn't assume that the goal here is to conquer Iran, is to overthrow the regime. This is about destabilizing. You know, that's what the air strikes have been about. It's been about neutralizing their ability to fight back. It's been about destabilizing the regime so that the situation can arise for an overthrow.
To deal with the Kurdish advance, Iranian forces will need to mass into large units. They'll need to reveal their tanks and heavy armor, get lots of troops together in tight concentrations, and try to maneuver their way toward Kurdish forces out in the open, where they can be picked off from the air. Really, they won't have much choice. The alternative would be to just stand by and give the Kurds a clear path into Tehran.
Yeah, this is a great point, too, is that right now one of the things that Iran has going for it is the ability to protect their weapons, protect their drones and their missiles and their launchers in caves and in mountains and places that we can't easily get to them or easily find them. You send ground forces in there, they just have to draw those out.
Speaking of Tehran, the Kurdish advance will most likely concentrate on areas a few hundred kilometers away from the capital, far enough that Tehran probably isn't an imminent risk, but close enough that when Iran needs to pull additional forces to stop the Kurds, Tehran is where many of those reinforcements will come from. Draw out those forces, and Tehran will become much more vulnerable by the day. Maybe a Kurdish offensive overstretches Iranian forces so badly that they start to lose control in other parts of the country. Maybe by drawing the forces away from the capital, the US can set the conditions for a popular revolt within the city. Or maybe Iran's very limited capacity to coordinate its troops will simply be stretched past its breaking point, disrupting what remains of Iran's command and control capabilities.
Or maybe this goes horribly wrong and we're talking about just massive numbers of dead human beings that gains little to nothing. Obviously, we're on this side of it right now. We don't know what's going to happen. When Vietnam happened, the U.S. and their allies had grand plans for what it was going to look like and had no idea it was going to end up looking the way it did. We really just don't know what's going to happen.
A Kurdish offensive might also introduce another element to the conflict: US or Israeli boots on the ground, in small numbers.
There are already US and Israeli boots on the ground. Let's not kid ourselves. There's absolutely CIA and Mossad agents all over that country right now.
As military advisors. This would be well within the norm for US and coalition operations in the Middle East, partnering with local forces to make up the vast majority of personnel on the ground, but relying on special forces, paramilitaries from intelligence agencies, or other advanced specialized troops that know how to operate competently in that environment. Those troops can call in targeted airstrikes, provide tactical support and guidance, offer access to advanced battlefield technologies, and if necessary, fight as the tip of the spear. As of now, the prospect of US or Israeli forces assisting Kurdish forces is entirely speculative, but again, it would be consistent with past conduct by the US and its allies. With a ground offensive, like the one we're discussing, the Kurds and their allies would also be running the risk of miscalculation. That's not because the Iranian military or its paramilitary allies would be able to rally and defeat the Kurds outright. That's a possibility, but it's about as unlikely as a Kurdish takeover of Tehran. Instead, the greatest risk is that a Kurdish advance could galvanize opposition from the Iranian public, even among people who might have been happy to see Ayatollah Khamenei killed. With a Kurdish attack like the one we're discussing, Iran would face an inherently greater risk of civil war, instability, and chaos that could last long past 2026.
That's an interesting point that I hadn't really considered. I don't know how likely or unlikely that is, but that facing an external enemy on the ground, that Iranian people who might otherwise be opposed to the current regime might rise up in its defense.
Some in Iran are already skeptical of the US-Israeli air campaign, between the constantly shifting statements from American leaders about their objectives and the fact that the US and Israel have been calling for Iranians to revolt before they've created the conditions for a revolt to have any chance of success. Add the potential for overtly ethnic conflict, leading to a foreign-backed breakup of Iranian territory, and Iranians may come to believe that the price of a post-regime Iran just isn't worth paying. That's to say nothing of the costs that the Kurds could incur upon themselves, from Iranian strikes on Kurdish bases in Iraq to a direct intervention by Turkey to prevent Kurdish forces from taking hold. And the prospect of a Kurdish offensive raises a dangerous spectre in other parts of Iran, that the Kurds might not be the only group to try and slice off a part of Iran's territory. Immediately to the south of Iranian Kurdistan is a region where Iran's Arab population have wanted to seize autonomy for years.
So he mentions Iran's Arab population. So for those who don't know, Iranians by and large are not Arabic. They're not like, yes, they're Muslim. They're mostly Shia Muslim. Iran and Iraq are, I believe, the only two major nations in the Middle East that are majority Shia Muslim. But they're Muslim, but they're not Arabic in Iran, most of them. They're Persian. And so they speak a different language. They have a different kind of heritage. So there are some differences there.
In the southeast, there's Sistan-Balochistan, where the ethnic Baloch population has fought for sovereignty for years, both in Iran and across the Pakistani border. There's some evidence that the US and Israel have also been coordinating with the Balochs, who've become very good at running complex insurgent operations. Most dangerous of all could be the neighboring nation of Azerbaijan in the north along the Caspian Sea,
which I believe has already been hit by a few attacks from Iran.
Northern Iran is home to a large ethnic Azeri population, and Azerbaijan's leader Ilham Aliyev has made cheeky references to a claim over Iranian territory uncomfortably recently. That includes the city of Tabriz, as well as a fair portion of Iran's northern territory. Aliyev is a guy who really likes capturing land. Just see his capture of Nagorno-Karabakh from Armenia a couple of years ago. He's a guy with close ties to the US, including through ongoing major development projects, and now he's a guy with all the justification he needs. Days ago, Iranian drones struck the Azerbaijani city of Nakhchivan, and Aliyev responded almost immediately by ordering the military to prepare for retaliation. Even prior to that, Azerbaijani forces were already massing near the border, and its military had been placed on combat alert.
So just hearing all of this, what I'm hearing is there's incredible potential for this to massively destabilize the region if it all goes wrong. And you end up with all these different armies moving in on Iranian territory, trying to be the new bully on the block if they want to be. I mean, it could get really ugly really fast. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of moving parts to all of this.
Troops recalled from leave. So, by supporting a Kurdish uprising in the Iranian northwest, the US and Israel have a real shot at using the ground offensive to draw out Iranian forces, pick them off, and create the conditions for total regime change. But they also risk a much larger cycle of destabilization, if not just Iran's Kurdish insurgents, but its Baloch insurgents, its Arab insurgents, and its neighbor in Azerbaijan all choose to seize the opportunity to strike. Miscalculate. This Kurdish offensive could unite Iranians against the US offensive, create instability that will last for decades, or set the conditions for a far longer Iranian civil war.
Okay, that gave me some stuff to think about, confirmed some things I already thought about, and it's a scary time for a lot of people. Most of us are safe away from that. A lot of people are in harm's way. A lot of people that have grown up fearing for their lives are fearing for their lives again, and I just hope for peace. I hope for peace. I hope for the best for everyone involved, and I just pray that it all works out for the best in the end, whatever that looks like. Let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. If you haven't already, check out the website TrumbleCountyBoys.com. We're currently doing pre-sales of signed hardcover copies of my new book that's coming out April 6th. It's the story of a company of soldiers from the 20th Ohio Volunteer Infantry throughout the Civil War, from Fort Donelson through the March to the Sea and to the end of the war. Basically fought in most of the major battles of the Western Theater. So check it out. Link is down in the description and will be on the screen here in just a second. Thanks for watching.